كان قبل يومين افتتاح الموسم الفني الثقافي الجديد لدارة الفنون الذي تزامن مع انتهاء مشروع ترميم مباني دارة الفنون وبناء سور جديد لها. كما يسعدني أن أرحب بالفنان المعماري سهل الحياري الذي صمم هذا المشروع وأشرف على تنفيذه في هذا اللقاء الذي يقام بالتوازي مع معرضه المقام في البيت الأزرق بعنوان فن عمارة. ويسعدني أيضا أن أرحب بالمعماري الدكتور محمد الأسد الذي يشاركنا في حوار هذا المساء. باسمكم أحييهم وأرحب بهم وأدعوكم للترحيب بهم معي، فأهلا وسهلا بكم وأهلا وسهلا بهم جميعا. نعتذر هذا المساء لأن الندوة ستكون باللغة الإنجليزية وذلك لمشاركة الدكتور سهى هذا اللقاء، فنرجو أن لا تكون هناك مشكلة في هذا المجال. أهلا وسهلا.
Thank you very much. I thank you all for coming so late in the day and listening to us. My thanks, of course, primarily to Mr. Shoman, who invited me to come and talk to you, and to all my colleagues on my right, Mohammad al Asad, who were instrumental also in organizing this session here. And my thanks and prayers also go to late Mrs. Khaled Shuman. He left us all this edifice and things that we enjoy and Jordan will be enjoying learning from forever. I shall be briefly giving you an account of the recent Aga Khan Award for Architecture. Whatever is in the past, I presume that many of you know, or you can easily learn from our website, or if you drop me a line, an email, I can send you all the literature. So our literature is free, and all you need to do is just indicate that you're interested in learning more about it. This is not propaganda or anything, because the Aga Khan Award only promotes the quality of environment by architecture, primarily for the Muslim communities all over the world. And the awards have a long history. It started in 1977 as an institution. First award were given in 1980. And since then we had 9 cycles of the award. Each and every cycle had its own message. For instance, for the first 2 cycles, the idea was to have an anthology of projects that would highlight certain ideas that would be taken into consideration. These were the continuity in history, relevance with climate, and the cultural significance, and regional identity, and things of that sort. But it never denied modernity, it never denied contemporary expressions. It has taken a long way to come here. And these are the people who have contributed to the last cycle of the award. In the front row, you see His Highness and his son on his right-hand side. And at the back row, you have the steering committee and secretariat. In the front row, you have the jury who decided to give awards to the following projects. In 2004 awards, one thing which prevailed was not a common denominator or a message to be communicated to the world of architecture, but more concerned with quality. So projects, they all stand on their own. They are independently reached some kind of a perfection, which jury wanted to let the world of architecture and yourselves to know about it. And first project was the Al Abbas Mosque in Yemen. It was in a very derelict condition, and and about to collapse. And many of the people said that they should take the roof, which only they thought that that was the only thing which counts as the carved pieces of wood dating from the 12th century. And they said that that roof can be taken to a museum and the building could be left on their own. French archaeological institution in Yemen and archaeologist and restorer Darat, they said that that would be a big waste, and the things are only meaningful where they stay, and the context should never be lost. As you can see, this is not a community mosque. There must be definitely a pre-Islamic shrine for some revealed purpose, and that has to be my voice to know, so you just tell me and it was restored impeccably well into its original condition, more or less. But of course, some additions were done for the safety of the building. And this is how you see the ablution place prior to going into prayer. And it is a mosque where people come from the rural areas not only to pray, but they also gather around this place. As I said, it's more of a shrine and a mosque at the same time. And this is the roof that I have mentioned to you. And it was dismantled and taken into workshops. And most of the original processes and the dyes and the methods were used, but nothing new was added. So whenever there was a piece missing, they left it as blank, so that the message would be completed in mind, not in physical form. And it is a small mosque, and rather sophisticated, simple, very humble mihrab that accentuates the direction. And this is the condition of the roof prior to the restoration. As you can see, there were some makeshift columns made in order to protect it from collapse, and these things were all dismantled and restored. So the important thing was the dedication to the originality of the mosque and keeping everything in its place. Even the idea of leaving it as it is and covering it with some corrugated plastic roof was not favored for this particular thing. So this signal brings us to the end of the first project. And I expect the second one after this one. This is a very simple house. Believe it or not, it is produced for a multi-millionaire. It produces, no, nothing. This is a family of two brothers, and who produce shirts, millions of shirts every year, sell all over the world. And they wanted to have a sort of summer house where they spend all their leisure time with them. And I must tell you that this award owes a lot to Sahel al Hiyari, because he reviewed this building on behalf of the award. As we go into the procedures, if you want to know, I can tell you. It's a triangular site, which has one simple building with just basically 2 levels and 2 rooms. And you can see the situation of the house from a distance. As you can see, there are 2 concrete ribs to make it strong enough against earthquakes and things like that. But architecturally, the back rib, concrete rib, has all the service functions inside, and the front part has all the environmental control elements that I will show to you. And you can see it within the context of the village, and it has been situated in the context of the village, but a little bit far away from it. So the house opens completely, and it has shutters made out of raw reed. And downstairs is the living room, where the open kitchen and kitchenette facilities are at the back. And upstairs are 2 bedrooms. They also are slightly separated from each other. And this is how the architecture responds to the context, where the reinforced concrete ribs give the main structural safety, and the stone work, which is not cladding, solid stone roll going all the way up, gives the contextual reference to the building. So this is when it's closed to outside environmental effects, and it is very, very simple. In some other words, you may even consider it as being minimum that the architect himself has to declare himself as being one. One thing is very interesting. The architect is so minimal is that he didn't want to have the stairs from the first floor to the second floor be in the building, because he thought that it was cluttering the building, and he put the staircases outside as an outside terrace veranda. So in order to go from the living room to the bedroom, you have to get out of the house and get in again. So, and he is very proud that he persuaded the client to take his point of view. And the most interesting thing with this is that I should mention it here to you. When I recently told this in a lecture in the Ain Shams University to a group of about 1,000 students, they applauded the client, because in the Muslim world, the wealth is always put through our eyes, nose, and throat in the form of opulence. You know, they declare, shout, and show their wealth in decoration or in anything which they think that reflects their richness. Whereas these two brothers took totally the opposite side. They said that the modesty and the humble behavior is more appropriate. And we also think that it's also more appropriate to Islam, that we should not declare our wealth and earthly belongings that loud to people. So the jury split the funds equally, the two. It was not only for architecture, for architect, but the client who agreed to have a way of life which architect has designed for them, and they negotiated and agreed together that was good for them. And you can see it is probably in many cases unnatural, because it's hard to imagine a house without plastic buckets and brooms and washing machines and all these things that we have in our daily lives. In this house, nothing exists of that sort. There's not a single eyesore. Even the beds are simple beds, and the whole sitting area is just main couches, that's all. The other building that was promoted by a group of architects who won the competition organized by International Union of Architects is the Biblioteca Alexandrina. You know, it was the learning place of the ancient times, the classical times, where almost the total information of the world was housed in the Alexandria Library, and it was burned down. And this building was built with the help of UNESCO and many, many Arab nations and leaders who contributed in millions to make this building a reality as a new Biblioteca Alexandrina. And it is being open for the last 5 years. It's a big success story. There are more meetings than the days in the year, exceeding 400 in a year. And also daily visits are in the form of several thousands to come and consult the library. And there are many permanent collections and galleries. Architecture is also very interesting. It keeps up with the skyline of Alexandria. It doesn't interfere with that. It is more or less a symbolism of a sunrise on the horizon. It's a round building, it's a round on a round wall, and it levels up from in the staggering levels. In the lower level, you have the reference library. On the upper level, you have the information library. So the library does not only consider the collection of the books, but it also wants to be up with times with the modern technology of computers. And as you can see, the roof is allowing enough light in a very well-calculated manner. It's a very high-tech roof, but allows daylight to the whole spaces of the living quarters of the library. The outside wall is a round wall, and that displays all the written alphabets in the world since the beginning of humanity. Every alphabet that was invented is engraved as a symbol of learning or communicating with literature. And it of course gives a very neat surrounding to the library in a well-defined environment in the urban sense. So as you can see, this is the interior space which is going up in successive levels. This is the lower section. Then this is the view from the top looking down. And you can see the quality of light, which is northern light coming from the direction of the Mediterranean Sea. And some of the offices and seminar rooms project into this place from upper levels, and they also accommodate many other functions in these small meeting rooms that are dedicated for discussion rooms and seminars. Another project which is very dear to our heart, the problems in Jerusalem and the deprived Muslim population. They had difficulties in improving their environment, and there was a big project financed by Welfare Foundation, and the leader of the team was England-educated architect Suha Ozkan, and they took up houses one by one, and they restored them for the families themselves. In other words, it is not gentrification, it's not regeneration, it is doing the project for the people themselves. In the green, you can see the areas of intervention. They went up to 60 to 70 houses to restore, but they did not leave it at the level of restoring the houses only, but they also restored some public functions. They also restored some places for their own offices, and they restored some buildings as restaurants and cafeteria, very pleasant places to stay. And also they used restored spaces for their own workshops to produce elements for the restoration purposes. And also they had classes for the young to learn various skills. They not only did that, they had a regular newsletter and literature published to share their accomplishments with the wider world. So when you imagine the working conditions in Jerusalem, and it is not very easy to do anything, but they have accomplished an integrated, almost total restoration mission, not even a project, from houses all the way to public buildings, and literature and dissemination of information. And this was found worthy of purpose for the Aga Khan Award this year, last year. Petronas Tower in Kuala Lumpur is an accomplishment in the technology of a Muslim country. And this is designed by Cesar Pelli, Argentinian-American architect, who then took his basic inspiration from the Islamic patterns, and he regulated the skyscraper at the bases of interlocking squares, and he placed the columns on the intersections. But this building was not done out of steel or any other material. It was easy to built, it was done in high-performance reinforced concrete. So it is much firmer against any kind of hazards, including fire, and it is also one of the novelties of a structural system. And the offices themselves, as they project out, they give a much comfortable view of the city from several angles. And it is not only a good working environment, but also an architectural accomplishment that refers to that. The buildings are connected to each other at a mid-level bridge, and this bridge also serves the purposes of easy access to the upper floors of another building without going into the ground floor, but also gives chances of any emergency evacuation easily the mid-level of the building. And it has become in no time the symbol of the city, and the jury thought that this is an attempt in the Muslim world to grapple with the problems of modernity and high-rise building. And from that point it was found prize-worthy. The second project is on the other extreme. It is a building system designed by an Iranian architect, Nader. You may remember him. He had a book called Racing Alone. And he produced these beehive-type shelters against earthquakes. And it is all built with sandbags. And the process is this: they open a ditch as the foundation, and they fill up tubes of recycled material, either out of plastic or jute, and they fill it up with the sand, which is all over the place, and then they roll it on these sandbags, one on top of the other in layers, in regressing circles to complete into these circles and semicircles, and then it is being finished by the Hawaiian oculus, and sometimes it's closed, sometimes it's open, and after putting them together, these things are, these shelters are treated by plaster from inside and by wire mesh and plaster from outside, and they become shelters. It has been tested from Siberia to South America, from California to Iran, and even though there is not one living community with this technology was found innovative by the jury to be given the award. And another project is from son of a chief of a tribe or village called Gando, Burkina Faso. They had a school. You can see the school at the back, old school, and new school in the foreground. The chief's son, who studied architecture in Germany, he said that he owed everything in the world to education. And he said that the kids deserve a better environment to be trained for. And he invented a system, or applied a system, I should say, a building system, which is very, very simple. And its simplicity is basically responding to the environment. The building is raised from the ground against dust and floods. And then there's a wall-bearing construction of 3 classrooms. And on top of it, there's a ceiling which is not structural, but the main structural element is on the top. Is raised about 1 meter and 2 meters maximum, with a space frame kind of simple trusses that are connected to each other. So what happens is that when the rain falls, the noise is not directly transmitted inside, and the building protects itself from the unwanted effects of the sun at a high level, and there's a ventilation through the ceiling that cools the building down all the time. So as you can see, since even though it has 3 classrooms, all the spaces on the ends of the classrooms and in the middle of the classrooms, they are also used for educational gathering purposes. It is a simple solution for a function that can be probably repeated or emulated in many places. So during like the simplicity of the construction system, it is semi-laid earth blocks which is pressed together, and also the students are engaged in some symbolic horticultural effect so that they have much better relationship with nature that they are living in. And it was built with the participation of the people to celebrate and to have an example of their own. Now you see the inner structure, the concrete beams and loose terracotta tiles that define the upper structure of the building. So this is basically what we have accomplished in the that's probably called 2004, and that is the last cycle of the awards. So I think I only passed 4 minutes of my given time, but then there's an opportunity to talk more. Thank you very much.
Between 2 very busy streets in downtown, Basman Street and Faisal Street. And what happened is that the building becomes a passageway, a public passageway that people would use to pass from one street to the other. Again, architecture becoming an urban element. So you come from Basman Street, you find this wonderful arched opening, you take this beautiful stair down, you get to a courtyard surrounded by the shops of the mango market, then you go through a promenade that is also flanked by shops, and that leads you all the way then to Faisal Street. So you had this beautiful urbanism, I think, emerging in Amman at that point, which we sorely miss at this stage. And then finally we come to the architecture of modernism. Again, it took some time for that to make it to Amman. It probably made it in the late 1950s. Probably a good example of it is the Jordan Insurance building along First Circle, which was built, one person tells me, by a Lebanese architect who came into Amman by the name of Khalil Khouri. He built it in 1961. And I'm also told we have the local Armenian architect, Darat, who designed it. And probably both of them cooperated on the design of that building. Again, that building had these very elegant strip windows wrapping around it. But even though we think of modernism as being rather unsensitive or insensitive to issues of urbanism, that building also flanked 2 streets, had a wonderful urban passageway that connected the 2 streets, and people could pass through the building as they walked from one street to the other, from Rainbow Street to what we know as Darat al Hiyari. Again, this kind of urbanism, I think, that existed in Amman and that we sorely miss in our own day. And we have these very elegant 1960s houses during that period, with their horizontal spreads, with their open free plans, and with their extensive use of glazed areas. And I'm really sure that someone like Sahel has told me that he's always looked at these buildings and has learned a great deal from these buildings. So what we have is a very interesting, I think, architectural heritage in Amman from the 1920s to the 1960s, but unfortunately we know so little about it and have very little information about it. And finally, I just want to end with some of the names that come to mind when we think of that heritage. Unfortunately, we know these names very vaguely. We know so little about them. It's through asking people or talking to people or talking to relatives of people and so on. Names that come to mind, one of them is from the Khammash family. Some people tell me his first name is Asad. I asked Ammar Khammash once, what do you know about her? And Ammar is related to him, but not a descendant of his. And Ammar said, I don't know much about him, but I think he was responsible for an extension of the Husseini Mosque in the 1930s. Relatives of mine tell me he designed my grandfather's house, where our Center for the Study of the Built Environment now is located in the middle of the 1930s. But it's only bits and pieces that we know about people like him. Ammar then said, well, he was married to a German woman. Maybe he studied in Germany. Then we found out he has a daughter living in London. Maybe somebody should contact her and learn more about him. Another interesting story is the Mango family. The father of the two brothers who built the house that Sahel is restoring built a beautiful house in Jabal Amman in the late 1920s. It was one of the more elegant houses of Amman. A late member of the Mango family once told me it was designed by Muhammad al Husseini. Now, interestingly enough, he is the grandfather of an architect, a well-established architect in Jordan, Hani al Husseini. And what is more interesting is that Hani had passed by that house so many times, but had never known that it was designed by his grandfather. So all sorts of links are, I think, coming into being as we begin to explore that heritage. There's the architect Sharif Fawaz Muhammad, the father of Princess Wijdan Ali. He studied in Istanbul. He was the first architect or engineer to be hired by the municipality. We are told he started the first architectural engineering office also in the 1930s. He has some very beautiful buildings that we have in Amman. The old municipality building is his. The Bilbaisi mansion, which I mentioned earlier, the neo-Mamluk structure he designed with an Egyptian architect whose name we don't know. And then there's that very elegant salon d'or, the showroom in downtown Amman with the beautiful curving projections that he also designed. Now here we're a bit luckier because we have some documentation about him. An author by the name of Muhammad Rafi'. He's not an architect, he's an engineer by training. Actually did some archival work on him, and out of that came a small publication and an exhibition. So at least we have some information about him. And finally, we have all these architects from outside Jordan, or outside Amman who came in. I mean, I mentioned people who came from Jerusalem, from Beirut, and from Cairo. We know of an architect, for example, a Lebanese architect who lived in Jerusalem by the name of Sabah Samaha. He designed a series of houses for the Bisharat family back in the 1930s. A number of you might know Sayyid Qulaim, one of the most prolific architects, an Egyptian architect of the mid-20th century. He designed two elegant buildings, the Al Hussein Theatre and the Al Khayyam Theatre here in Amman back in the 1960s. I found out by coincidence that one of his assistants, an architect by the name of Saad Labib, had designed my parents' house in the 1960s. So all sorts of links almost begin to emerge. Ammar Khammash recently was telling me that he heard about an Italian architect who designed the Muashar hospital in Jabal Hussein. He doesn't remember his name, but he remembers when he was a student in the US, he was looking at a monograph about an Italian architect, and suddenly as he was opening it, he sees one of his works, the Muashar hospital in Jabal Hussein. So clearly, we have a very interesting story of the architecture of Amman during that period. We know so little about it. There are so many missing pieces. And in some ways, I'm hoping that an exhibition like this of Sahel's, which features so many interventions in the architecture of Amman from the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, will make us become more interested and more willing to begin to study that heritage. Thank you very much.
Very glad to be here tonight. I have exhibited, my first painting exhibition was in Darat al Funun, and that was in the summer of '88. My first architectural exhibition is here today, so all I can say that I'm really grateful for the support that I'm getting from the Hajj Shuman Foundation, and in particular Mrs. Suha Shuman, so thank you very much. Thank you also, Suha, for coming here for the project, for this wonderful opportunity to talk, and I would just like to talk about the project and maybe leave some time for questions. Maybe if we get the lines, Okay, this is the pre-existing state of the upper boundary of Darat al Funun. The basic premise of the project, the brief that is, was to redesign the upper boundary walls and recreate an entrance there, because that was progressively becoming a very important entrance for the Darat. And it is basically was in serious need of repair, and there needed to be also some general restorations for the upper area. So I just wanted to start by showing the conditions of the wall before we started the project. Basically, the first impression I got of this wall was how unspecific it is to the landscape, actually, the landscape behind, and how it revealed the roofs of the buildings below Facade in the blue house. The idea there was to try to kind of block the view to the roofs and to recreate an entrance which would completely put the visitor from the street down to the main spaces of the upper part without encountering the roofs or all the mechanical stuff that is placed above. This is the entrance, direct entrance to the stair. The idea of the project, however, this is just the first impression that I had. The idea of the project, however, stems from the nature of Darat al Funun itself, which I almost read as a balance list where several historical layers were described, starting from ancient history up to the 20s, and then to the renovations that architect and artist Aga Khan Award had magnificently done, up to the present time. So the basic premise basically was to add another layer to the project, which would not necessarily need such a process of development and such history and such character in a nostalgic way. On the contrary, I thought that it should remain very clear in order not to blur history like this. This is the side, one of the side boundaries, just showing the existing parts of existing parts. The project basically is this part here. I don't know if you can see the arrow. And one of the important things that we tried to do actually was to create a funnel, a public space, which basically calls all the passageways from all that land. The idea that the edge becomes actually space, and it becomes a space that provides the experience of the panorama, where once the person gets down to the lower level, the view becomes more precisely calibrated. The process by which we worked was to look at the context basically in a way that could inform the project. So the basic premise was to analyze the materials that actually compose the context, and it is very clear that we have two materials that work here. We have stone structures and concrete structures that compose the rest of the buildings and cabins of the city. So what happened was that the wall would have had to be kind of a visual hybrid between both, that would present itself as a third entity that belongs to the two languages of stone and cement blocks of concrete, yet that doesn't belong to either. So by doing so, the continuity of the process by which Darat al Funun has grown is actually maintained and extended. These are just plans showing the way we design the walls. As you all know, the walls consist of flat surfaces with protruding blocks that are located at key areas. Protruding blocks that are located at key areas such as entrances and locations of and connections to old structures or corporate conditions. The process by which the walls were built was it's a double wall of reinforced concrete structure, and then it is cladded with somehow a series of blocks that protrude and with steel members that were like the markers for the plastering. This is just the process of the construction. Basically, all the steel channels were placed to enable the plaster to follow a guideline. It's actually called in Arabic wada. Wada is basically what they follow. They put like concrete, they mark two concrete lines on the two cement lines on the wall, and they follow it, and that becomes their almost guideline to plaster the wall. In this case, what they did was use the steel members to enable the plaster to work and create such three-dimensional formations on the corners and the entrances. One of the most interesting things actually that I found about that really attracted me about the area was the scale of the surrounding buildings, and that in many cases what you see is actually buildings that block a view, and there are openings, for example, like a staircase here that actually frame views in a very precise manner. And in this way, what we did was to actually follow the same scale of the buildings and try to recreate this condition in terms of how the view is the city is reframed and represented to the visitor. And that will be seen in the following slides. This is just the process of how the old plastering. This is a garage edition that we did also for the Darat. This was meant to be almost an object for the car to be exhibited. This is the entrance for the garage. I would like to jump just to. Sorry. This is the entrance. Now, that space is actually instrumental in the project because what it does is to put the public realm from the street and actually reintroduce it within the Dara. The Darat al Funun is no longer three houses from the 20s. It's actually an arts foundation, and it is a public space, and therefore the entrance had to reflect that aspect. And that space, what it did was actually prolong the experience in terms of viewing the city, while when you turn the corner, the view opens up and it becomes framed by the two buildings and the wall off to the side, and viewing a platform that is still really developed as a pedestal for sculpture. This is the garage again. I would actually like to end it here because I would like it more to be a kind of discussion in terms of questions and answers. I think that would be more interesting. So if we could do that would be great.
To ask Dr. Suha Ozkan about his impression on the actual architecture of the city of Amman. You have been coming to Amman so many times, and how do you feel? Do we have similar problems in different cities, or this loss of identity? What do you think of that?
You all will be very angry with me, but I like Amman very much. There are reasons for that. For instance, with the exception of last 5-6 years, there has never been an eyesore in the skyline. It has been kept rather modest, very humble kind of urbanization. And it has always grown. It has always grown on planned land. There are always lots of land available for people to build. And there was some homogeneity of using the limestone. And that limestone, up to 3 stories high, brought again some kind of an urban homogeneity to that. And in other places in the world, I always liked Amman because it had an identity of its own. And it has a very strong rules to protect. For instance, when I compare it to my hometown, Ankara, where 70% of the population lives in mushroom housing, and remaining 30% lives on speculative built apartment blocks, which no character, no identity, whatever. And that would be in a similar way, that kind of building probably could be found in Beirut, for instance. And in Cairo, the informal building sector is rather of a horror of a story because it's built so shabbily and people react so badly to that. So in comparison to the others, I'm not comparing Amman to Venice or Paris or Geneva, but as a modern city, particularly developed in 1960s, 70s, I have always found it rather pleasant place to be, and that's always been my impression, because you feel the planning control in Amman. Even though you complain, I know, but I'm comparing to the wider world. Amman is still, from many respects, under control, I see.
You were very careful about saying that until the past 5-6 years. So the last 5 years there have been dramatic changes.
But we know the reasons for that, because suddenly the money that was sucked away from Western investment sources are coming to the Muslim world. And then deformation can be viewed in many places, One extreme would be Dubai, for instance. And Amman is taking its share, and we in Turkey also taking our share of that. Because this capital has not found a sort of safe niche for itself, and it's going into real estate in an ugly way, I can say, from many points of view, and Amman is taking its share. And I also noticed that there are things that happened in Cairo in 1950s, 60s are happening here. They're building flyovers to bring people fastly into the city. It should be the reverse. It should be just getting people out of the city. Those attractions should be made elsewhere so that central business district and central city will not be suffocated. But it's happening in a way, and these are basically non-architectural solutions or non-planning solutions, if you ask me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. I really do appreciate your work, and I really did appreciate the structural quality of the surface, whereas all the architects, including myself, we've all been very busy in the sculpturing of the forms, and the surface was ignored totally. Actually, it became too plain, too dull. And your solution for the surface, I think it will push concrete and stone and the whole mentality. I think it will push it forward, and it's beautiful. I love it. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, the idea for the stone and concrete was not only to kind of marry the two languages or make a hybrid for the two languages, but actually to create links between both, where by proposing or intervening with the wall as such, with its specific kind of formal language, you start establishing a discourse between the two materials that compose the context. So that was the idea. Yes, and also if you stand in specific locations and you see it with the citadel as a backdrop, you begin to read the rapport that it in something so far away and so old and something so new. So,
just a comment. I think I'd like to bring up the issue of some kind of, sometimes I feel I like very much the contrast between the modern, whatever modern means in architecture, and the traditional, let's say, tree houses of Darat. But one has to also be very careful of falling into maybe sometimes an overdose of intellectualism in architecture. Sometimes this can get tiring. I have to say, it scares me sometimes when architecture can get closer to haute couture. And especially in the context of Jordan, where we really have major problems. A city without master plan, rural community, and rural physical environment that is falling apart. I think sometimes there must be, architects maybe should retain a minimal degree of naivete, if I will say, or maybe a minimal degree of humility or of humbleness. It's just a reaction to me, you know, to sometimes I'm a bit afraid of the effect of media on architecture and of even academia on architecture, because you go to universities, I go to juries and all this high concepts, and sometimes I don't understand them sometimes.
actually, I totally agree with you, and this is exactly and precisely why this wall came about in this almost naive manner. You know, I looked at stone, I looked at concrete, put them together, and this is what came out. I mean, so yes, absolutely, I guess I agree with you.
What's of your opinion?
You know, when the first book published on architectural disorder to declare the quality of architecture outside the Western world in 1975, I think. There were 2 Jordanian architects in there. There were altogether 12 from the world, but 2 were from Jordan. And they all, both Jafar Tukan and Rasim Badran, knew how to converse with the limestone and an environment, and created some novel traditional forms there. And now I see the works of the other, you know, Bilal, Ammar, Amash, and the present author here, you know. And there are things happening here, and I feel very encouraged with the Jordanian scene. I mean, there's enough intellect, also there's enough practice, and I really congratulate Mrs. Shoman to give this chance to Sahel to experiment new ideas. You know, I really enjoyed what has been accomplished there without touching much to the substance of the heritage, but still trying to bring some novelty to what's existing. My impression is that I really enjoyed it, and it will be also a good experience for the new architects and students to look at how he deals with it. And him also not being shy to display his paintings and as well as his drawings on architecture at the same time. That brings some kind of a good Renaissance picture of architecture, of someone who's concerned with the ideas. And on the other hand, you have Mohammad, who single-handedly has a self-made institution, which we all know. The world reads from his website what's happening in the world, what's happening in Jordan. So these are all, for someone like me who is committed to promote the quality of architecture, especially in the Muslim world, are very encouraging things that we don't have it in many countries. I can assure you, we don't have this much of content. Not even Turkey, you know, 70 million population. You know, there are some, you know, drops of things and thinking into that. So I feel very encouraged, and I'm really happy to be here to learn more.
باسمكم أتقدم بالشكر مرة أخرى للدكتور سهى أوزكان وللدكتور محمد الأسد وللمعماري الفنان الدكتور سهل الحياري. فأهلا وسهلا بكم وبهم دائما.